Myron McCormick, who'd played Luther Billis for the entire run, stepped forward after all the bows had been taken and announced that the curtain would never fall on South Pacific.
Just talking musicals with you.
Hello, I'm Lesley Anne Knight and welcome to Just Talking Musicals and Part 4 of our South Pacific story. On the 7th of April 1949, South Pacific, the new Rodgers Hammerstein co-production with Leland Hayward and Josh Logan, opened at the Majestic Theatre on West 44th Street with a reassuring record-breaking advance box office of $400,000. Any doubts the producers may have had of its potential success must have melted away amidst this unprecedented demand for opening night tickets, with what Variety magazine described as an audience comprising a who's who of show business and the arts, who not only repeatedly stopped the show with applause and cheers, but who also gave a prolonged standing ovation at the final curtain. With the confidence of their advance box office behind them, Rodgers and Hammerstein broke their usual precedent and actually hired not only the roof of the St. Regis Hotel for an after-show party, but also ordered 200 copies of the New York Times to be handed out to their guests in the early hours, hot off the press. And they weren't to be disappointed. Literally all the critics loved it. And in the same way that Oklahoma had been innovative and groundbreaking in 1943, South Pacific was outstanding for the craft and skill that had gone into every single aspect of the production, setting the bar nice and high for years to come. South Pacific would go on to run for 1,925 performances on Broadway. That's a run of 5 years, and for a while was second only to Oklahoma as the longest-running musical on Broadway. When the national tour began and the tickets first went on sale in Cleveland, Ohio in 1950, the box office was forced to close for 3 whole weeks in order to process the massive demand for tickets. Mary Martin stayed with the show on Broadway for over 2 years before leaving to star in the London production at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And singing alongside her as Emile de Becq was opera singer and Broadway veteran Wilbur Evans, along with 2 young unknown actors playing Seabees who were just starting out in their careers. A young bodybuilder by the name of Sean Connery and Mary Martin's 20-year-old son Larry, who would each later go on to find global fame respectively playing James Bond and J.R. Ewing. In 1957, 8 years after it first opened on Broadway, Rodgers and Hammerstein struck a deal with 20th Century Fox to make the film of South Pacific. Oscar involved himself in every aspect of the production, from location finding to choice of director, and for the first he settled on the beautiful island of Kauai in Hawaii, and for the second he went to the man who had loved the show from the very start, Josh Logan. Casting wasn't quite as straightforward as before, as Asia Pinza had recently died, and Mary Martin was sadly no longer as young as Nellie Forbush needed to be. So they looked to leading Italian actor Rossano Brazzi to be their new Emile, and because he wasn't a singer, they invited one of the stars of the Metropolitan Opera House, Giorgio Tozzi, to dub Brazzi's voice. After toying with asking both Elizabeth Taylor and Doris Day to play Nellie Forbush, Logan was eventually swayed by a young actress who turned up hoping for a small part and landed herself the lead. Her name was Mitzi Gaynor. John Kerr and Franz Nguyen were cast as Lieutenant Cable and Liat, and Juanita Hall, the only member of the original cast, was to play Bloody Mary again, but only to have her own voice dubbed by Muriel Smith, who'd played the part in London, and this was at Richard Rodgers' insistence, as he was worried about how her voice would record on film. So much dubbing of the lead voices, in fact, went on in the film that only Mitzi Gaynor and Franz Nguyen's voices were left untouched. At previews for the film, the critics disliked everything from the dubbing to the special colour filters used to film it, the screenplay and the choreography. But when it opened on March the 19th, 1958, the public took it to their hearts, and it became a smash hit on both sides of the Atlantic and played continuously at one cinema, the Dominion in London's Tottenham Court Road, for nearly 5 years. And it finally notched up a cool $18 million at the box office. This phenomenally successful musical has seen numerous touring companies and revivals in the 60-plus years since it first appeared at the Majestic Theatre. One of the most recent revivals proved that it can still ignite excitement when it opened at the Lincoln Center in New York in 2008. Directed by Bartlett Shear and starring Kelly O'Hara and Paolo Zott, it became an overnight sensation, prompting the New York Times critic Ben Brantley to proclaim, "Love blossoms fast and early" in Bartlett Shear's rapturous revival of Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. This South Pacific recreates the unabashed, unquestioning romance that American theatregoers had with the American book musical in the mid-20th century, before the genre got all self-conscious about itself. The show feels too vital to be a museum piece, too sensually fluid to be square. And it ran for 2 years to sold-out houses and notched up no less than 7 Tony Awards. When South Pacific first opened on Broadway, it set the bar high, winning more prizes than any other musical it ever won, including 9 Donaldson Awards, 8 Tonys, and the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. The original cast album sold more than 1 million copies, and when it finally closed on Broadway on the 16th of January 1954, Myron McCormick, who had played Luther Billis for the entire run, stepped forward after all the bows had been taken and announced that the curtain would never fall on South Pacific. With tears in his eyes, he invited everyone in the theatre to join in singing Auld Lang Syne, and when they had finished, the stage slowly emptied, the curtain remained unlowered, and the audience eventually, reluctantly, left. Right, that's it for this episode. Coming up, we venture back to Broadway and the story behind one of my favourite musicals of all time from 1950, Guys and Dolls. I'm Lesley Anne Knight. You can find Just Talking Musicals on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and as a handy podcast as well. Oh yes, and of course, we'd love it if you press subscribe. There's nothing to pay, but it means you get sent a message when we post a new episode. See you soon.
Just talking musicals with you.